Imagine stepping onto a cruise ship for the vacation of a lifetime, but instead of luxury and laughter, you're met with sounds no one is playing, passengers who never existed, and nights that repeat themselves until you begin to wonder if you'll ever escape. These are not campfire tales. These encounters have been double-checked, pulled straight from real reports and verified Reddit accounts. What you're about to hear is the raw fear of ordinary people who set sail and never return the same. If you think you're brave enough, dim the lights, put on your headphones, and join us at Midnight Outcry. Don't forget to hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and drop a comment below, because on this ship, every passenger is remembered, whether they came back or not. Story 1. I always thought a cruise would be the safest kind of vacation. Big floating hotels, endless food, sunburnt tourists snapping pictures. What could possibly go wrong out there? My name's Kyle Thompson, I'm 36, from Missouri, and I've spent most of my adult life working in logistics warehouses. My days are forklifts, pallets, and schedules. No ghosts, no curses, no mysteries. At least, that's what I believed before I stepped onto the Aurelia. It was supposed to be a break. My sister Melanie had convinced me and her husband Owen to join them on a week-long trip out of Florida. She'd pitched it like some kind of dream. Sunsets at sea, buffets, pool decks glowing under string lights. I hadn't taken a real vacation in years, so I said yes. What I didn't realize is that the nightmare didn't wait until the last night. It started almost immediately. From the moment we boarded, something about the ship felt off. The lobby was beautiful, polished brass railings and a chandelier that swayed gently with the motion of the ocean, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't explain. The air smelled faintly of salt and something metallic, like old coins rubbed together. When we found our cabins, mine turned out to be a windowless inside room, tight, dim, with air that seemed too still. Melanie laughed, told me I'd barely be in there anyway. That night at dinner, everything looked normal. Waiters carried trays, families toasted cocktails, and the low hum of the engines vibrated under the carpeted floor. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man at the far end of the dining hall who didn't fit. His uniform was outdated, the kind you'd see in black and white postcards, and his pale face was frozen in a thin smile. He stared directly at me, even when I looked away. By the time I glanced back, his chair was empty. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling from the night before. Over breakfast, I tried to tell Owen and Melanie about the man in the dining hall, but they brushed it off. "You probably just saw a reflection or someone in a uniform you didn't recognize," Owen said, sipping his coffee. But it wasn't that. I could still feel his gaze, lingering even in memory. After breakfast, I decided to explore the ship alone. The corridors were immaculate, yet somehow claustrophobic, lined with polished wood and brass fixtures. Every step echoed against the steel frame, mixing with the distant hum of the engines. I passed the crew areas, hearing muffled voices and clattering dishes behind closed doors, but no one seemed to notice me. Or maybe they did, but chose not to acknowledge it. By late afternoon, the unease deepened. I was walking along deck 7 near the pool when I noticed the first disappearance. A family of 3, parents and a small boy, were playing in the water. I waved at them, smiled. Within seconds, the boy had slipped under the water, a splash, and when I blinked, the family was gone. Not floating in the pool, not standing by the railing, just gone. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was hallucinating. But the wet footprints leading from the pool area to the maintenance stairwell told a different story. They were fresh, small, childlike prints, then abruptly ended. I reported it to the ship's reception, trying to keep my voice steady. The receptionist gave me a polite smile, pressed a button, and said, "We logged the complaint. Thank you, sir. Please enjoy the cruise." No urgency, no security dispatched, nothing. That evening, the ship's corridors seemed quieter than usual. The metallic creaks of the hull, the rhythmic sway of the ship against the waves, and the low hum of the engines suddenly became oppressive. I swore I heard whispers trailing behind me, short, almost inaudible phrases, only to find empty hallways when I turned around. Then I saw it. A photograph taped crudely to a bulkhead, It was of the missing family, smiling at a dinner table. But when I looked closer, there was someone else in the photo. A man, pale and grinning, standing just behind them, dressed in the same outdated uniform I had seen the night before, his eyes locked with mine. By the next morning, the ship felt more like a trap than a vacation. Every deck I walked felt subtly wrong. Carpets slightly damp, lights flickering with an irregular rhythm, a faint metallic scent in the air mingling with the brine from the ocean. I started carrying a small notebook, jotting down every oddity: missing passengers, strange reflections, whispered sounds, even the faint groaning of steel as the ship cut through the waves. Owen and Melanie had begun to notice my tension. "You're taking this way too seriously," Melanie said as I flipped through my notes over breakfast. But I couldn't stop. My gut screamed that something was preying on the passengers, and that I was next if I didn't figure it out. I decided to check the surveillance cameras. The ship had monitors in the crew areas showing the main hallways and stairwells. Sneaking past the security desk, I glimpsed the screens. My stomach sank. On every feed where passengers should have been, I saw shadows. Figures moving unnaturally, stepping around corners that didn't exist on the ship's map. And there it was again, the pale man from the photograph, appearing behind passengers just before they vanished. Determined to follow the trail, I ventured into the rarely used service corridors. The smell of damp metal was stronger here, mixed with a faint tang of decay. The engines hummed low, the vibrations running through the steel floors, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm. I heard muffled laughter echoing faintly, and somewhere, water dripping, slow, deliberate, as if marking a path. And then I saw the missing family, or what was left of them. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, staring at nothing. Their clothes were damp, clinging to them, but they were standing perfectly still, as though frozen. I couldn't call out. My voice seemed swallowed by the air itself. The pale man appeared again, stepping from the shadows. He held nothing, yet I could feel a weight of inevitability pressing down on me. I ran, heart hammering, but the ship's layout twisted in impossible ways. Corridors that should have led to stairwells looped back to empty halls. Doors led to walls, and the faint, distorted whispers followed me, circling around my skull. At one point, I passed a dining hall where a single candle flickered. In the reflection on the polished table, I saw dozens of faces, passengers I'd recognized, grinning eerily. All of them were wet, pale, smiling, and all staring directly at me. I ducked into a maintenance closet to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my flashlight, and that's when I noticed the note pinned to the wall. "Welcome to the cruise you'll never leave." A cold wind blew through the vent above, carrying faint laughter and the scent of seawater. My flashlight flickered. For a split second, I saw the entire ship, not as a vessel, but as a dark, shifting labyrinth floating on black water, corridors folding into each other, passengers disappearing into the depths like shadows dissolving. I knew one thing: this was bigger than a missing family. Whatever had taken them was systematically erasing passengers, and now I was in its path. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound, the hum of the engines, the distant clank of metal, the creaking of steel beams, made me flinch. The smell of the ocean mixed with something foul, almost coppery, drifting from the lower decks. I pulled on my jacket and decided to explore again. I had to understand what was happening before the pale man claimed me too. The stairwell that led to the crew area now felt like a passage to another world. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness. Water dripped rhythmically from above, echoing like faint footsteps behind me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, shadows seemed to stretch along the walls, though no one was there. I stumbled upon a small, unmarked cabin. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, a group of passengers, wet, pale, and eerily still, stood in a circle. Their eyes were glassy, staring into nothing. It was as if they weren't alive anymore, yet they weren't entirely gone. I realized These were the missing passengers. They weren't just taken, they'd been transformed. A whisper brushed my ear. "Why do you look so scared?" It was the pale man. He stepped from the shadows, fluid and silent, like he was gliding on water. "They come and go, but you're still learning." I spun around and ran, following the hallways as they twisted unnaturally. The floor groaned under my feet, a metallic echo that made the walls seem alive. I passed a hallway that should have led to a stairwell, but instead it opened into a flooded ballroom. The chandeliers swung slowly, dripping with salt water. Drowned passengers raised glasses in a toast, their eyes locked on me. My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, I noticed something small floating on the water. A key card. My cabin number was written on it. My pulse spiked. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a trap. Every step, every corridor, every dripping vent was designed to lead passengers into the same fate. I ran further, ducking into a maintenance closet. My flashlight caught a glimpse of a wall lined with mirrors. Each reflection showed passengers I'd seen earlier, but their expressions were twisted, some smiling, some screaming silently. And in the reflection behind me, I saw him, the pale man, grinning wider than any human face could stretch. I backed away, nearly knocking over a mop bucket. The echoes of footsteps surrounded me. I realized the ship itself was moving, corridors folding into each other, doors appearing and disappearing. The engine's hum grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. Then I remembered something Owen had mentioned earlier in the day. Some passengers claim the ship changes for them like it's alive. I hadn't believed him at first, but now I understood. It wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. And it had rules designed to trap, confuse, and consume. I peeked through a vent and saw a stairwell leading upwards. But instead of the deck above, it opened into a room filled with dozens of clocks, all ticking at different speeds. Each tick echoed like a scream. I realized this was the heart of the ship's manipulation, a place where time bent and reality fractured. My mind raced. If I didn't figure out the pattern, the next time I stepped into a hallway, I'd vanish like the others. The pale man's voice echoed again, this time from everywhere. Time is patient, and so am I. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. The hallway stretched before me like a snake, twisting and turning with impossible angles. The salt smell thickened, the hum of the engines now almost deafening, like the ship was alive and aware of my fear. I clutched the keycard tightly in my pocket. It was my tether to reality, my fragile link to the world I had left behind. As I moved forward, the lights flickered. Shadows danced across the walls, forming grotesque shapes, faces of passengers who had disappeared, their eyes hollow, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Every step I took seemed longer than the last, the floor beneath me shifting subtly, betraying the normal rules of architecture. Then I saw him, the pale man, standing at the end of the hallway, his grin wider than sanity could bear. Behind him, the missing passengers formed a slow, ghostly parade, their movements synchronized as if pulled by some invisible conductor. Their damp clothes clung to their bodies, their glassy eyes locked onto me. "You should have stayed in your cabin," he whispered, voice echoing inside my skull. But curiosity is always the costliest mistake. Panic surged through me. I ran, my shoes squishing on the waterlogged floor. The hallways morphed again, doors leading to nowhere, walls bending in impossible angles, ceilings opening into black voids. I was losing all sense of direction, trapped in a labyrinth that didn't exist on any ship map. A flash of memory hit me. Owen's warning about the ship's rules. It wasn't just about disappearing. It was about becoming part of the ship. Every missing passenger now existed in a liminal state, neither alive nor dead, feeding the ship's consciousness. I realized the keycard might be my only escape. but only if I understood how to use it. The pale man glided closer, every step silent, yet my heart pounded like it would burst. Time bends for me. Space twists for me. You are just learning. He raised a hand, and the walls seemed to pulse. The missing passengers reached out, their damp fingers brushing against the air, a cold that went straight to my bones. Desperation took over. I ran toward the nearest stairwell. My flashlight flickered, then went out, leaving me in utter darkness. The dripping water sounded like a chorus, a rhythm mocking my fear, and then I saw a faint light, my cabin. The door was slightly open, a beacon of safety in the madness. I shoved it open and lunged inside. The door slammed behind me. Silence. For a moment, I thought I had escaped. But then I noticed the water on the carpet, and the faint smell of salt and rust in the air. My breath caught in my throat. I reached into my pocket. The key card, still there. My hands shook as I stared at it. I was home, physically at least. But something about the card chilled me. It was a reminder, a tether, a warning. I couldn't explain how I got back. I couldn't explain why the pale man didn't follow me. But I knew one thing. The ship had chosen me. And even now, as I sit in my apartment, the faint hum of engines echoes in my mind. The corridors are still there. The missing passengers still wait. And the key card is still in my pocket. The ship remembers. I remember. And maybe you should too. Story 2. I used to think cruises were the safest vacations you could take. No roads to worry about, no airports, no layovers. Just you, the ocean, and a floating hotel where everything you need is already included. That's what sold me on it last summer. I just turned 30, and after years of working long shifts as a paramedic in Phoenix, I figured I deserved something easy. No emergencies, no stress, just a week of calm seas. My name's Eric, and I don't scare easily, or at least I didn't, until I met someone who, to this day, shouldn't have existed. It started before we even left port in Miami. I'd arrived early, dragging my single duffel through the crowded terminal, watching families, honeymooners, and retirees shuffle through the check-in process. Everyone was buzzing with that pre-vacation energy. People snapping photos, kids pressing their faces against the tall glass windows to see the massive ship waiting outside. That's when I first noticed him. He stood alone near the edge of the boarding line, tall, maybe mid-40s, with slicked back black hair that caught the fluorescent lights. His clothes looked dated, dark slacks, a buttoned shirt tucked in too neatly, almost like something out of an old black and white photo. But it wasn't his outfit that stuck with me. It was how still he was. Everyone else fidgeted, adjusted bags, checked phones. He didn't move at all. His eyes just swept the crowd, calmly, like he was studying us. When our eyes met, he smiled. A small, polite smile, like we were sharing a secret. I don't know why I smiled back. Boarding took forever, the usual bottleneck of security checks and ID scans. When I finally stepped onto the ship's gangway, I looked behind me out of habit. He was right there, only a few people back, walking with a casual stride like he had all the time in the world. But later, when I asked a crew member about him, they swore he never boarded. At the time, though, I didn't know that. At the time, I just kept running into him. After check-in, I dropped my bag in my cabin. No balcony, but not bad either. Just clean sheets, a little desk, and the steady hum of the ship's engines deep below. The smell of salt water clung to the air, mixing with faint traces of cleaning solution. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, feeling the faint vibration under my feet, thinking, yeah, this is going to be good. I headed up to the main deck to explore. The sun was dipping low, casting gold across the waves. Music played faintly through hidden speakers. Crew members bustled around, setting up for the sail-away party. And right at the railing, looking out toward the horizon, stood that same man. This time, he turned fully toward me. "First cruise?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like every word was carefully measured. "Yeah," I said. "You?" He tilted his head like the question amused him. You could say that. Then he extended his hand. Name's Walter. I shook it. His grip was ice cold. And just like that, I was talking to Walter like he was any other passenger. We joked about the crowd, about overpriced drinks, about how endless the ocean looked. He laughed at the right moments, asked me about my work, even told me he'd been on many voyages before. But when I asked where his cabin was, his smile faltered, just for a second. Not far, he said, then changed the subject. I didn't think much of it. Not then. But looking back, I should have paid attention to how the air seemed heavier whenever he stood nearby, or how no one else seemed to acknowledge him unless I introduced him first. The strangest part? That first night, when I checked the photos I'd snapped of the sunset, Walter was in them, clear as day, leaning against the railing just a few feet away from me. The problem was, when I flipped through the rest, he was in those too, even the ones I'd taken before I ever spoke to him. Always near the edge of the frame. Always watching. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ship's engines gave off a constant low hum that vibrated faintly through the walls, like a mechanical heartbeat. Every few minutes, I'd hear a soft creak as the steel frame shifted against the swell of the waves. The air was cool, dry, almost recycled, and it carried the faintest tang of seawater mixed with cleaning solution. Normally, those sounds would have lulled me into sleep. They reminded me that I was far from the chaos of my job, somewhere safe. But I kept thinking about Walter. When I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not doing anything sinister, not grinning like a villain, just looking at me with that calm, steady expression. Like he was waiting for something. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. I pulled on a hoodie and sneakers, grabbed my keycard, and slipped out into the hallway. The carpet smelled faintly damp, like it had soaked up years of salt air and spills. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. I walked the length of the corridor, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. That's when I saw him again. Walter stood at the far end of the hall, perfectly still, hands folded in front of him. His gaze locked onto me instantly, even though I hadn't made a sound. "Can't sleep?" His voice carried easily down the hall, soft but clear. I froze. Neither can you, I guess. He chuckled lightly, though it didn't sound natural, more like he was imitating the way people laugh. "The ocean keeps me awake sometimes. You hear it, don't you? That endless rhythm." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, the waves." But then I realized something. My cabin was deep inside the ship. No portholes, no balconies. From here, you couldn't hear the ocean at all. Walter tilted his head, like he'd caught me noticing. Then he whispered, "Sometimes it's easier if you just walk the decks." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away. His footsteps made no sound on the carpet. I hurried after him, but when I rounded the corner, the hallway was empty. Just rows of identical doors, silent and still. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, the ship was buzzing with energy. People crowded the buffet, kids splashed in the pool, bartenders flipped bottles at the deck bar. Sunlight shimmered on the waves so bright it hurt my eyes. For a while, I convinced myself I'd dreamed it. Long shifts as a paramedic had fried my sleep patterns. I was prone to insomnia, to weird half-dreams when I was overtired. That had to be it. But then I overheard something at breakfast. A couple sitting behind me at the buffet line whispered about a strange man they'd seen near their cabin in the night. They said he was just standing there, smiling, not moving. When they asked if he needed help, he didn't answer. He just turned and walked into a stairwell. I leaned back casually, trying not to seem obvious. "What did he look like?" I asked, pretending I'd just caught part of their conversation. The woman shrugged. "Tall, dark hair, kind of old-fashioned looking. We figured he was drunk or something." I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't tell them I knew exactly who they'd seen. That night, I left my cabin door cracked, just enough to hear the hallway. Every creak of the steel hull, every hum of the engines set my nerves on edge. And around midnight, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving past my door. I held my breath, watching the strip of dim light from the hallway. A shadow slid across it, pausing right in front of my cabin. And then, 3 soft knocks. Not frantic, not impatient, just steady, like a polite visitor. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After a long pause, the shadow shifted. The footsteps moved on. When I finally worked up the courage to peek out, the hall was empty. But taped to my door, fluttering slightly in the recycled air, was an old-style paper boarding pass. The kind they used decades ago, before everything went digital, and the name on it was Walter. The next morning, I carried that paper boarding pass in my pocket like it was radioactive. I kept touching it, pulling it out, rereading the name printed in faded ink. Walter Price. No cabin number, no modern QR code, just a seat assignment and a logo from a cruise line that didn't even exist anymore. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank, maybe left over from one of the ship's themed shows. These ships always had actors dressed up for murder mysteries or old-fashioned gala nights. That had to be it. Someone messing with me, but the edges of the paper were brittle, yellowed, like it had been handled for decades. I went straight to the guest services desk. The crew member there, an efficient-looking woman with her hair tied back tight, smiled in that way you know is rehearsed. "How can I help you today?" I slid the boarding pass across the counter. "This was taped to my cabin door last night. Can you check if this name is on the passenger list?" Her smile flickered, just slightly, before she picked up the pass. She examined it for longer than I expected. Her brow furrowed. "Where did you get this?" "I told you," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "It was on my door, room 1014. She didn't type anything into the computer. Instead, she slipped the boarding pass under the counter, out of sight. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'll look into this for you. Please, don't worry." "Don't worry?" I laughed nervously. "Someone's knocking on my door in the middle of the night and leaving weird old boarding passes, and you don't want me to worry?" Her smile returned, forced. "We'll handle it. Enjoy your cruise." That was it. Conversation over. I walked away fuming, but also unsettled. Something about the way she'd hidden the pass, like she didn't want me to have it anymore, made my skin crawl. Later that afternoon, I found myself on the top deck, leaning against the railing, staring out at the endless horizon. The ship cut through the gulf like a knife, the water foaming white against its steel belly. I inhaled deeply, the air salty, humid, heavy, with diesel fumes from the stacks. That's when I heard it again. Can't enjoy the sea without thinking about what lies beneath. I turned. Walter stood just a few feet away, hands folded neatly in front of him, his posture unnaturally still. I froze. You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," he said calmly. "But you are. That's how it starts." His voice wasn't threatening, but it burrowed into me anyway. I glanced around. Families laughed by the pool. A bartender shook cocktails. A group of teenagers ran by chasing each other with dripping ice cream cones. And yet, no one else seemed to notice Walter standing there. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" He smiled faintly. "You'll know when it's time." And then, he turned and walked straight toward the stairwell. I followed. I couldn't stop myself. His black shoes made no sound on the steel deck, even though mine clanged with every step. Down one flight, then another. The ship grew quieter, emptier, as we descended. Until finally, he stopped in front of a heavy steel door marked Crew Only. He placed his hand flat against it and looked back at me. "Do you hear them yet?" "Hear who?" The door rattled faintly, like something was pounding on it from the other side. 3 slow, deliberate bangs. Walter's smile widened. "They're still waiting." I blinked, and in that split second, he was gone. The door was just a door again. But when I pressed my ear to it, I swear I could still hear faint knocking. And worse, a voice whispering my name. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the knocking again, the same 3 dull thuds, as if coming from deep inside the walls of the ship. My ears strained in the silence of my cabin, waiting for it, dreading it. And at 2:13 a.m., it came. 3 bangs. Slow, deliberate, I shot out of bed, pressed my ear to the cabin wall. Nothing. Just the faint vibration of the ship's engines, that low, constant hum like a heartbeat. I backed away, but my skin prickled. The sound hadn't come from inside the walls. It had come from the door. I yanked it open. The hallway stretched out silent, the patterned carpet soft under my bare feet. Every door closed, no one in sight. But taped to mine again was another boarding pass. Same faded logo, same brittle paper. Only this one didn't say Walter Price. It said Eric Coleman, my own name. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. This wasn't a prank anymore. Someone knew who I was. Someone wanted me involved. The next morning, I went straight to the library on deck 6. It wasn't much. A few shelves of battered novels and tourist books, some quiet tables, a handful of computer terminals for checking email. But buried in a binder near the corner was something better: the ship's historical archive. Old photographs, news clippings, promotional brochures from decades past. And there it was, a black and white photo, dated 1972. The same ship, younger, shinier, under a different name. Passengers crowded the gangway, smiling, waving. I leaned closer, scanning faces, and my stomach dropped. Walter Price. Same suit, same posture, same calm expression. He stood near the front of the line. His name was listed beneath the photo, but the caption beside it chilled me. Photographed minutes before boarding. Walter Price, never embarked. Witnesses say he was seen leaving the pier and walking away. So how the hell was he photographed on the ship years later? I kept digging. Newspaper scans, reports. Over the years, dozens of people had reported seeing Walter aboard. Always described the same way. Quiet, polite, standing near the stairwells. Always vanished when confronted. And every single one of those accounts ended the same. Those who saw him disappeared. Not all at once. Sometimes mid-cruise, sometimes later, after disembarkation. But always gone. Their cabins found empty, luggage untouched. In some cases, passengers made it home, only to vanish days later. A chill burrowed into my bones. I thought of the paper in my cabin. My own name printed on it, as if I'd been added to his list. That night, I told myself I'd stay awake, keep the lights on, guard the door. But fatigue crushed me anyway. Sometime around 3, I woke to the sound of the door clicking open. My stomach knotted. I wasn't alone. I didn't turn my head. I just stared at the reflection in the dark TV screen across the room. Walter, standing inside my cabin, not moving, just watching me breathe. I lay frozen, pretending to sleep, my chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, while my eyes stayed locked on the reflection in the black TV screen. Walter didn't move. His silhouette stood too still, too deliberate, his head tilted in a way that made my stomach churn. Finally, I forced myself to turn. The cabin was empty. But on the nightstand, where my phone should have been charging, was another boarding pass. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was damp this time, edges curling, the ink blurred like it had been dragged up from the ocean floor. It didn't have Walter's name. It didn't have mine. It simply read, "Final boarding." I threw it across the room and bolted out the door. The hallway felt narrower, as if the walls were pressing in. The steady hum of the engines was gone. All I could hear was the groan of steel, the faint creak of metal shifting, like the ship itself was alive. My feet carried me to the atrium, hoping for signs of life, anyone awake at this hour. Instead, I found the grand staircase bathed in an unnatural glow. The chandeliers swayed slightly, though no air moved, and gathered at the base of the stairs were people. Dozens of them. Passengers in dated clothes, 1970s suits, dresses from the 80s, vacation polos from the 90s, water dripping from their sleeves, their hair plastered to their foreheads. Their eyes were pale, clouded, and every one of them smiled when they saw me. Walter stepped forward from the crowd, dry, composed, untouched by the seawater that stained everyone else. He extended a hand toward me. "You've been chosen," he said, his voice calm, resonant. "The ship doesn't let go of its passengers. Not truly. You boarded, and now you belong." I shook my head, stumbling back. I didn't. "I'm alive. I'm not like you." He smiled, faint and sad. "Neither were we, once." Behind him, the drowned passengers began ascending the staircase, one by one, reaching for me. Their hands dripped cold, their mouths moving in unison, though no sound came out. My pulse hammered as I scrambled backward, my shoulder slamming into the wall. I spun and ran, tearing through hallways that twisted wrong, corridors looping into places that shouldn't exist. No matter where I turned, the knocking followed. 3 dull thuds echoing behind every door. The smell of seawater clung to me, stronger with every step, until it filled my lungs like I was drowning in it. Finally, I burst through a door into open air. The deck stretched out before me, moonlight glinting off black waves. No crew, no other passengers, just me. And Walter, standing at the railing, waiting. I edged back toward the door, but it was gone. Nothing but solid steel wall behind me. Walter lifted something from his pocket. A boarding pass. He held it out, and in the wind it fluttered toward me. I caught it instinctively. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the name. Eric Coleman. The same one taped to my door. My name. Walter's expression softened. "It's easier if you stop fighting it. The sea doesn't forget. The ship doesn't forget." Behind him, the drowned passengers emerged, lining the deck, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. Dozens of them. Hundreds. I tore the paper in half, screaming, throwing the pieces into the wind. For a moment, everything went still. The ship, the waves, the air, frozen in silence. Then Walter stepped closer and whispered, "We'll wait." The next thing I remember, I was waking up in my own bed at home. No explanation, no memory of disembarking. Just the same clothes I'd worn that night, soaked in salt, and in my pocket, creased, soggy, impossible, was the boarding pass with my name on it. Final boarding. Story 3. I used to think cruise ships were like floating hotels. Safe, predictable, and a little boring if I'm being honest. I had never believed in curses or haunted places. That was before last year, when I boarded a ship out of Miami with a few coworkers, expecting nothing more than cheap drinks and too much buffet food. My name's Marcus, I'm 31, and I work in commercial printing back in Orlando. I'm not the type to scare easily. I've worked graveyard shifts around giant presses in empty warehouses, walked home through downtown at 3 a.m., and shrugged off plenty of strange noises. But what I lived through on that cruise, it changed me. It was the second night at sea when I first heard the music. That's the detail I can't get out of my head. The sound, faint at first, rising through the metal bones of the ship as if the walls themselves carried a memory. It was the sound of violins, a full string section, faint horns too, playing something old. Not pop songs or party tracks, but ballroom music, the kind you'd hear in a black and white film from the 1930s. I remember pausing in the corridor, pressing my palm against the cold steel wall, and feeling the vibration. I thought maybe there was a live band somewhere on the ship. But when I checked the daily itinerary, nothing was listed for that hour. And here's the thing. The music wasn't coming from the open decks or the show lounge. It was coming from below, from a level that was supposed to be sealed off. That little detail should have been enough for me to walk away. But I didn't. I followed the sound. The deeper I went, the more the ship itself seemed alive. The steady hum of the engines vibrated through my shoes, the smell of salt water clung to every breath, and the corridor lights flickered in strange patterns, like a heartbeat. When I reached a rusted stairwell at the far end of the passenger decks, I realized exactly where the music was leading me, the Grand Ballroom. But that didn't make sense. The Grand Ballroom had been closed for years. I remembered reading it in the welcome brochure, historic ballroom, sealed and preserved for safety, no entry permitted. And yet, from behind that locked double door, I could hear an entire orchestra swelling in perfect harmony. I stood there longer than I should have, my ear practically pressed to the wood of those ballroom doors. The sound wasn't muffled. It was alive, clear, every note ringing, as though hundreds of people were inside dancing across polished marble floors. I swear I even heard laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the shuffle of shoes. But the doors were chained shut. A heavy brass lock sealed them like they hadn't been touched in decades. I tugged once, twice, no give. Yet the music poured through, swelling with a piece I half recognized, like something my grandmother used to play on her old record player. That night I told my coworker Tyler about it over drinks. He laughed it off. Ships make weird noises, man. You've got the engines, the water pressure, all that metal creaking. You hear what you want to hear. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wanted something strange to break the monotony of cruise games and watered-down cocktails. But deep down I knew what I'd heard. And it wasn't pipes or machinery. It was a damn orchestra. The next night, it happened again. Only this time, I wasn't alone. I'd been wandering after midnight, restless, not ready to head back to my cabin. That humming melody floated up the stairwell again, and I froze. Then, from the shadows at the end of the hall, a woman stepped out. She was older, maybe late 50s, hair tied back neatly, wearing a simple navy dress. She had the same wide-eyed look I must have had. "You hear it too," she whispered. "Not a question, a statement." I nodded. We walked together, neither of us speaking, until we reached the locked ballroom. Sure enough, the music swelled again, horns blaring as if the conductor had raised his hand for a crescendo. She crossed herself, muttering, "God help us." That unsettled me. "Have you been here before?" I asked. She shook her head. "But my husband heard it yesterday. He thought it was just the crew messing around. But when I came looking earlier, I found him standing here, staring at the doors. Said he saw someone walk in." Her voice cracked when she added, "No one else saw it. And he never came back to the cabin." That sent a chill right through me. Before I could respond, a faint clack echoed from the ballroom. The chain on the door had shifted. And then, as if unseen fingers toyed with it, the padlock snapped open. The music stopped dead. The silence after was worse than the sound. The woman gasped, her hand gripping my arm so tight I felt her nails dig in. She whispered, "It wants us inside." For the first time in my life, I believed her. I should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to sprint down the corridor and pretend none of this ever happened. But the woman's grip kept me there. Her eyes were fixed on that brass lock, now dangling loose in the chain like it had been undone for us specifically. The doors creaked inward, just enough for a sliver of blackness to show. Not light, not even dust, just a void. But with it came a faint smell, sharp and metallic, mixed with something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I whispered, "What's your name?" "Carol," she said, her voice trembling. "And if we go in there, Marcus, we won't come back." Hearing my name from her lips made me flinch. I hadn't told her who I was. I opened my mouth to question it, but she pressed a finger to her lips and pointed. Inside that gap, something flickered. A shadow moved across the darkness, tall and deliberate, followed by the faint scrape of a bow on strings. Then the music returned. Only this time, it wasn't muffled. It blasted through the opening with such force that I staggered back, covering my ears. Violins shrieked, horns blared, drums pounded. It wasn't a waltz anymore. It was chaos, a storm of sound, too sharp, too fast, too wrong to be anything human. Carol stumbled to her knees, clutching her head. I bent to help her, but froze when I looked through the opening again. There were people inside. Rows of them, their silhouettes swaying in perfect rhythm, like dancers caught mid-step. Their outlines shimmered faintly, like candlelight reflected on water. None had faces. Just empty space where eyes and mouths should have been. One by one, their heads turned toward us. The doors burst wide open. Carol screamed. I grabbed her hand, pulling her back as the figure surged forward, not walking but gliding, their forms flickering in and out with each discordant note. They filled the corridor, faceless dancers brushing past without touching us. Yet every time one passed close, a chill burned down my spine, freezing me to the marrow. The orchestra swelled louder, so loud it rattled the walls. My vision blurred. The carpet shifted beneath my shoes, blue and gold transforming into marble checkered tiles slick with condensation. A chandelier swayed above us, though there shouldn't have been one, dripping candle wax that hissed when it hit the floor. I blinked, and suddenly we weren't in the corridor anymore. We were inside the ballroom. Hundreds of dancers filled the floor, pale figures dressed in finery from another century. The orchestra sat at the far end, all skeletal, their fingers stretching impossibly long over their instruments. The conductor, tall, cloaked in black, turned toward us. His face was hollow, just darkness where a face should be. He lifted his baton, and every dancer froze mid-step. Carol whispered, "We shouldn't have come here." The conductor lowered the baton directly at us. The air thickened, pressing against my chest like I was drowning without water. The conductor's hollow gaze locked onto me, that void where his face should have been somehow more suffocating than if he had eyes. My grip on Carol's hand tightened. She trembled, her knuckles cold as bone. The baton rose again. The dancers stirred. Slowly, they turned their faceless heads toward us, their bodies swaying in eerie unison. Then, with a sound like wind rushing through a cavern, they began to move, not toward each other, but toward us. "Run," I whispered, though the word caught in my throat. We tried. But the room wasn't a room anymore. The door we'd entered from was gone, replaced by mirrored walls, stretching endlessly in every direction. The chandeliers multiplied overhead, dripping wax that hissed like snakes. The air reeked of salt water, heavy and damp, as though the entire ballroom was submerged far below the surface. The music shifted into a waltz again, only now the beat synced perfectly with my pulse. I felt it inside my ribs, inside my teeth. The dancers surrounded us, gliding silently until we were boxed in at the center of the ballroom. Carol screamed when the first one touched her. Its hand wasn't solid, more like chilled vapor, yet it sank into her shoulder as if her body was made of clay. She convulsed, her mouth open in a silent cry as the faceless figure leaned closer, pressing its forehead against hers. I yanked her back, but something held me in place. My shoes stuck to the floor like tar. I looked down and saw the marble tiles had softened into something darker, wet planks of rotting wood. They creaked under my weight, groaning like the hull of a sinking ship. "Marcus," Carol whispered, her voice hoarse. Don't let them make you dance." I didn't understand at first, but then I felt it. My body swaying, my arms rising on their own, feet shifting in rhythm with the music. I wasn't choosing it. The orchestra was. My limbs belonged to the conductor now, pulled like strings on a puppet. The faceless dancers drew closer, their cold touch brushing my arms, my chest. One took my hand, placing it gently against the hollow curve of its waist. Another gripped my shoulder, forcing me into a spin. The conductor's baton slashed downward, and every single figure surged in perfect synchrony, the room swirling into a blur of motion. Carol was beside me, caught too, her body jerking as she fought against the unseen grip pulling her into the dance. Her eyes locked with mine, wide with terror. "If we don't stop, Marcus, we'll stay here, forever." The thought hit me like ice water. Maybe that's what all these dancers were. The lost, the missing, those who boarded this ship decades ago and never returned. Trapped in an endless waltz, faceless, nameless, bound to music that never stopped. I fought with everything I had, forcing my body to stagger instead of glide, but the music punished me. The violins screeched so violently my ears rang. The chandeliers swung wildly, spraying hot wax across my skin. The floor beneath me heaved, pitching like a ship caught in a storm. And then I saw it. Behind the conductor, barely visible through the mist, was a door. Wooden, cracked, with a brass porthole in the center. Unlike everything else in this place, it looked real, solid. Carol saw it too. She mouthed one word, "Go." But the conductor noticed. He snapped his baton upward, and instantly every dancer stopped. The silence was worse than the music. For a moment, the entire ballroom held its breath. Then he pointed the baton toward the door, and the orchestra erupted again. Louder, faster, furious. The dancers shrieked in unison, though they had no mouths. Their hands clawed at me, trying to pull me deeper into the spiral. Carol vanished from my side, swallowed by the faceless crowd. I tore free, lunging toward that door, each step like wading through cement. The conductor raised his baton higher, and the music grew unbearable, vibrating through my skull until I thought it would split open. The floor buckled, cracks opening wide, black waters seeping through. But I reached the door, my palm hit the cold brass handle, and then the handle was slick, wet with condensation, almost alive under my grip. I yanked it, desperate, and the door screeched open. A blast of cold, briny air hit me like a wave, carrying the unmistakable scent of the open sea. Behind me, the music surged into a crescendo. Violins shrieked, horns blared, the timpani thundered like a heartbeat. I risked one glance back and wished I hadn't. The dancers were no longer human-shaped. They had melted into streaks of shadow, their arms stretched unnaturally long, their hollow faces collapsing inward as though gravity itself was devouring them. At the center of it all, the conductor's faceless head tilted back, and from the void where his mouth should have been, came a sound that wasn't music at all. It was the roar of the ocean itself. Carol was gone, swallowed into that storm of faceless forms. I stumbled through the doorway, slamming it shut behind me. The sound cut instantly. Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring because it's too complete. I was standing in a narrow, rusted corridor. The walls dripped with condensation, steel groaning softly like a living creature. Somewhere far above, I could hear the muffled thrum of the ship's engines, steady and low, like a heartbeat in the dark. For a moment, I thought I was safe. My legs gave out, and I slid to the floor, gasping. My shirt clung damp to my skin, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But as my breathing steadied, I noticed something. The faint sound of music. Not loud this time. Not the full orchestra, just a single violin. Slow, mournful, drifting down the corridor like smoke. I forced myself up, stumbling toward the sound, and found myself in front of another door. This one wasn't grand or gilded, just a plain steel hatch with peeling paint. My instincts screamed not to open it, but I had no choice. I pushed it wide and staggered out, into my own cabin. Same cheap carpet, same low hum of the AC. My suitcase against the wall, my jacket tossed across the chair. For a second, I almost believed I'd dreamed it all, except I wasn't alone. The photograph lay on my bed, the one I never remembered taking. A ballroom frozen in time, the orchestra mid-play, the dancers mid-spin, and in the corner, almost hidden in shadow, I saw Carol, her face half erased, already fading into blankness. I backed away, my throat dry, when something cold brushed my pocket. I reached inside and pulled out the keycard to my cabin, only it wasn't the one the cruise line had given me. This one was older, heavier, its edges corroded. Across the surface, engraved deep, were two words: ballroom access. I dropped it, but it clung to my palm like it was part of my skin. That was the last clear memory I had before I blacked out. The next morning, I woke up in my bed at home. No explanation, no ship, no Carol, just silence and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone insane, that the whole thing was some fever dream, until I stood up and felt the weight in my pocket again. The keycard was still there. The next morning, I woke up in my bed at home. No explanation, no ship, no Carol. Just silence, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat there for a long time, waiting for the faint vibration of engines, for the steel groan of the hull, for the muffled swell of an ocean I couldn't see. But there was nothing. My house felt hollow, like the air itself had been emptied of warmth. When I finally forced myself to the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror and froze. Behind my shoulder, for just a heartbeat, I swore I saw rows of faceless dancers, swaying in silence, their heads turned toward me before vanishing into the glass like mist. I thought maybe I'd gone insane, that the whole thing was some fever dream, until I stood up and felt the weight in my pocket again. The key card was still there. And faintly, so faintly I wanted to believe it was just my nerves, I heard the sound of a violin playing somewhere in the walls of my house. Story 4. At 11:47 p.m., the announcement was made over the PA in a composed and upbeat manner. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us as we unveil the panoramic view of the Aurora deck. Come to the observation lounge with us. I froze. Deck Aurora? At 11, the ship's deck maps came to a halt. I had already made 2 trips along these corridors today, and I was in cabin 703, halfway down the starboard side. The Aurora deck was absent. I'm Mason Reynolds, a 32-year-old Seattle-based freelance journalist. Reporting on luxury liners occasionally meant odd encounters, but nothing like this. I had taken this voyage in part for the excitement, in part for the landscape, and in part to escape the grind of deadlines. I'm an introvert by nature, therefore I've always liked to be alone with my camera and a notebook. However, there was something about the voice on the PA that made my arms stand on end. Curiosity prevailed over caution. With a flashlight in hand, I walked out of my cabin into the quiet, deserted hallways. There was the familiar hum of engines, but it seemed muted, as if the ship itself were holding its breath. Aurora deck was not an option when I checked the elevator, which said, Deck 11. I set off on foot. Perhaps my imagination was playing tricks on me, or the passageways twisted strangely. I went by cabin after cabin. The numbers seemed to change when I looked again, and every door was the same. From under the final door on the starboard side, a dim light emanated. With my heart pounding, I walked over and saw it. A dim reflection of a deck outside, moonlight dancing on water, but the walls were made of solid steel when I got to the window. I gave a head shake. Too much wine earlier in the evening, too exhausted. I went on, the beam of my flashlight piercing the night, each step resonating strangely. A faint tap came from behind me. I whirled, but there was nothing. Then another, nearer. I dared not turn around. As if it had grown out of the corridor itself, the door to the observation lounge appeared out of nowhere. Aurora Deck Private was written on the metal plate, and my hand shook as I reached for the knob. The room was impossible to fit inside. The walls appeared to stretch farther than physics permitted. Chandeliers hung but remained stationary, and moonlight flowed across the smooth wood flooring. A figure, a formal-dressed crew member, stood at the middle, pouring beverages into crystal cups. Our eyes met the instant he raised his head. His smile was polished and courteous, but it stopped short of his eyes. There was nobody else. There were no people occupying the chairs. They filled the cups, and the floor echoed with the murmur of faraway music. A murmur slipped by my ear. I tried to get away, but the attraction to the center was too strong. Welcome to the deck that shouldn't exist. With my heart pounding and my camera and notebook gone, I took a step closer. Every stride sounded as if it were going to break the room. After pouring another drink, the figure set it down on a table. There were no kids, but I could hear faint giggles. They appeared to pulse through the walls themselves. With a start, I recognized that all of the reflections in the lounge's mirrors were incorrect. With wide eyes and shaking palms, my own image trailed after and moved on its own. "It's ready for you," the crew member whispered quietly as he cocked his head to observe me. I felt frozen, but I wanted to flee. The voices became louder and the air thickened, simultaneously delicious and salty. Where there were no lights, shadows flickered in the corners. Then I noticed movement behind the mirrors, dozens of pale, smiling individuals stepping stealthily. I knocked over a chair as I staggered back. Impossibly, the impact reverberated, rebounding off walls that appeared to be farther away than they should have been. More mirrors and incessant reflections took the place of the entrance I had entered. I realized then that I wasn't simply lost. I was waiting, watching, and inside something living. And the crewman raised a drink, still grinning. "It's your turn," he muttered. I dragged myself toward the table with the crystal glasses as my legs moved against my will. The air felt heavier as I drew nearer, as though the room itself were pushing down. The chuckles increased, mingling in unfathomable harmony, and the whispers became a deep murmur. My heart was thumping so loudly in my throat that it was drowning out everything else. I took another look at the crew member. He never flinched. Although he remained motionless, his eyes followed me with an unusual level of accuracy. "Just a sip," he murmured quietly. The voice had an odd weight, as if it were a threat or a promise. I grabbed my camera off the ground in the hopes that the sound of the lens clicking would wake me from this nightmare. The room moved as soon as I pointed it at him. Higher up, the chandelier's crystals reflected moonlight over the walls in ragged patterns. Like living flesh, the mirrors appeared to pulse. Then, I saw that additional individuals were behind him in each mirror. I saw faces I didn't recognize, all of them smiling softly, appearing pallid and damp. I stumbled over a chair as I retreated, with its beam frantically spinning across the room. My flashlight clattered to the floor. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in the midst of the confusion, a figure moving behind a mirror, only partially visible. Before it disappeared, I was unable to concentrate on it for more than a second. The crystal glasses shook as though they were vibrating from some secret frequency, and there was a faint groan. A silver liquid spilled from one that overturned on its own and dissipated before it struck the ground. I took a deep breath. My feet were stuck to the glossy wood, so I should have run. The crew member stepped forward and said again, "Take it." Behind him, the reflection whirled, forming an endless tube. Not my body, but a warped, hollow-eyed image of myself was there. Reaching out to him, I felt a wave of panic and yanked myself out of the mesmerizing grip. In search of the door, I dashed toward the closest wall. My hand struck a hard piece of glass. It was a mirror, not a door. My image returned the stare, but this time it grinned first. Then the other forms materialized, spectral but real, all of them advancing in unison toward me. The murmuring became louder, nearly audible. My mind was split by the words, "We have been waiting for you. Don't go just yet. Come with us." I staggered back and pushed against the distant corner. The ceiling seemed to rise higher than it should, and the space looked to stretch. There was no breeze, but the chandeliers moved a little. The figures, shadows moved across the walls, changing into forms I didn't want to know. In a flash of insight, I reached for one of the glasses on the table, the one at the far edge, not the one closest to the crew member. I lifted it with a trembling hand, partly expecting the liquid to move as if it were alive. For a moment, the room froze. Then, just as abruptly, there was silence. The mirrors were gone, I realized. The figures behind them were gone, as were the ceaseless reflections. With one exception, the glass I was holding had emptied itself. The environment appeared normal again, but my palm was still shaking. Then, from the far end of the lounge, where there was no table, came a gentle, clinking sound, like silverware on china. The crew member was gone when I turned. Like a predator, the whispers continued to circle the room, faint but relentless. My thoughts were racing. I had to go. I needed to locate a door. However, the once constrained observation lounge appeared to be infinite, extending beyond what any typical architecture should permit. Prior to all of this chaos, I had half-recorded my voice note from my subscription line. With an odd sense of comfort, I whispered under my breath, "If you're listening, take a moment to subscribe to Midnight Outcry. It helps keep stories like this alive." As the clinking increased in volume, shadows began to move across the floor. The walls of the room appeared to beat like a heart. Once more, I recognized that I was not alone. Another monster was approaching from behind, following me silently across the floor. There was nothing I could do but continue. Every step reverberated, but the sound seemed off, delayed, overlapping, as though the area I was in was a loop. I had to get out of this endless lounge before I joined it. At the far end, a dark doorway emerged, with enough light to direct me. Ignoring the murmurs and the damp, soft footsteps behind me, I ran toward it, my foot snagged on a loose floorboard, causing me to slip and scrape my palms on the shiny floor. My palms were burning, but I persisted. I arrived at the doorway. My hand made contact with the knob. The murmurs intensified into a chorus of screams. When I turned the knob, everything turned black. I awoke on the floor in what appeared to be a typical hallway. The dismal gray of service halls had taken the place of the observation lounge's glossy wood. In my hand, my flashlight glowed feebly. The air smelled strongly like ocean and was wet and metallic. No eerie reflections. No crew member moved. I inhaled deeply and made an effort to calm my heart. I pushed through the pain in my legs from jogging. Each stride reverberated strangely, reflecting off of walls that seemed too near, too little. I pondered whether I had been drawn into a parallel layer of the ship after recalling the odd doorway I had seen, the one that lit at the far end of the lounge. I froze as the ship's public address system crackled and a distorted, whispering voice said, "Welcome to the real voyage." It sounded familiar but incorrect, as if someone had time-stretched a crew announcement. I continued in the hopes of coming upon an elevator or stairs. Little nuances all around me raised the hair on my neck. There was a ship map on one wall, but the deck numbers were odd. 1, 2, 3, 13, 14, 15. I had never heard of decks. "Passengers lost will find their way here," read a small comment near the bottom, and I hesitated, trying to take in what I was reading. I touched the map with trembling hands. Behind me, the corridor creaked. On the metal floor, a hefty object moved. I turned around. Nothing. But in the corner of my eye, a shadow moved in and out of focus. Once more, I heard the steady, gentle clinking of glasses. My stomach turned over. It sounded as if it had somehow seeped into this lower service deck from the viewing lounge. I have to just get moving and stop thinking. A maintenance door was ajar a little. A small staircase slid downward beyond it. It appeared safer than the hallway, but I had no idea what was underneath. The stairs creaked under my weight as I gently descended. In the quiet, every stride reverberated like a rhythm. I heard footsteps behind me halfway down. Slow, methodical, not keeping up with me. I was afraid to look. I was afraid I may shatter my ribs from the intense pounding of my heart. The stairs led to a tiny, poorly lighted service room that was stocked with barrels and cartons. The stench of iron and salt was strong. Then I spotted a specific crate. It featured a little keyhole, unlike the others. A single glass, half full with the same silver liquid, was resting on top of it. I felt sick to my stomach. A primitive part of me knew it held the solution, or the trap, but I didn't want to touch it. From the corner came a low murmur. "Take it." The voice was inside my thoughts, not simply behind me. I shook my head wildly in an attempt to muffle the noise. Behind me, the door clanged metallically shut. My flashlight wavered. Then I noticed motion in the darkness. Out of the shadows came humanoid figures, all damp, but not like people who have been soaked. They followed my every step, their eyes glowing dimly, hollow and pale. I could see the gleam of an antique wedding band, corroded by seawater, on the finger of the person who took a step closer. I recognized that these were neither passengers nor crew. They were different. Something imprisoned near the ship, bound to it by some forgotten mishap or curse. "Drink or join us forever," they said in overlapping whispers, and I staggered back, my palms grazing the container. The silver liquid spilled out of the glass as it swayed and then tilted slightly. Touching the flooring, it hissed and immediately evaporated. In answer, the figures circled me and hissed. I seized a nearby barrel as a temporary shield as panic struck. Then I remembered that I had already recorded a note in my own voice. Now repeating it felt like a lifeline, bringing me back to reality and balancing me against the chaos around me. If you're listening, take a moment to subscribe to Midnight Outcry. It helps keep stories like this alive. The container was my only hope as the figures moved forward. It was as if the keyhole were calling. I searched for a key with trembling fingers. My thoughts were racing. I was uncertain if I would be saved or doomed if I opened it, but I had no choice but to stand there as the figures drew closer. My fingertips felt as though they were pulsing through the keyhole. The key was there, cold metal on my palm, and I had no idea where it had come from. I paused. Even though everything inside begged me not to use it, I persisted despite the whispers, which were already a faint chorus. Open it up. Come along. Don't resist. As I inserted the key, my hands trembled wildly. Almost too effortlessly, it turned smoothly. There was a click in the small service room. As I opened the lid of the crate, it creaked and a light silver mist rose from inside. I staggered backward and coughed. As though acknowledging some invisible power, the figures froze and cocked their heads together. I observed a little tarnished medallion, a notebook soaked in water, nautical maps, and an elaborate arrangement of artifacts inside the crate. The air was calm, yet the pages of the journal fluttered. A shudder went down my spine when I saw the words, "The ship claims those who look, those who take, and those who resist," on one particularly striking page that was ruined with water. Around the container, the mist formed figures, including hands, faces, and even ghostly outlines of previous travelers. While some mourned in silence, others grinned. A single person moved forward and touched my shoulder with a bony hand. I spun around and yelled, but to no avail. The pressure remained, like an imprint on my flesh even after the hand was gone. More tunnels I had never noticed were revealed by the shifting walls surrounding me. The figures herded me toward the closest corridor, moving with the same purposeful slowness. My spotlight was bouncing wildly as I raced, creating warped shadows that appeared to be reaching for me. Something above echoed a low gurgling sound. More water was leaking than ever. I recalled my earlier exploration of the lower decks. The ship was more than simply a ship. It was a living thing that reshaped its own space, trapped souls and reshaped roots. One of the figures moved in front of me as I staggered into a small passageway. It had a faint, sickly blue shine in its eyes. Slowly, it lifted its hands. The silver mist behind it started to pour out of the crate and fill the corridor, curling like living smoke around my legs. And then there was a click, 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 like heels on stone. Human, not one of the figurines. I went cold. The appearance of another crew member seemed genuine this time. Her eyes were wide, her outfit clean, and she was young. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. I began to say, "The captain. He doesn't like visitors down here." But my throat tightened. As though alive, the silver mist flinched away from her. She pointed to a door on the side. Right away, I didn't think twice before they realized you had gotten away with it. With the mist snapping at my heels, I dashed toward the door. The hall twisted awkwardly as the figures surged, the doors closing on themselves as though the ship was trying to suck them back in. Panicked, I pushed the door open. I discovered myself on a stairwell, where the sound of the engines was more audible. The constant groan of the ship's hull against the waters drowned out the distant laughter of the ballroom. As I went down, my heart was racing, hoping that this would take me back to the main decks. At the halfway point, I stopped. A subtle muttering, gentle and playful but foreboding, trailed after me. The ship had memory, I realized with increasing horror. It wouldn't let me go so lightly because it remembered who had seen its secrets. At the corner of my eye, I noticed movement as my flashlight flickered. There was a shadowy figure that was too quick to follow, yet sufficiently visible to give away its presence. Once more, the mist teased me by curling around my legs, telling me that the ship was never really behind me. A hatch led back to the crew passageway at the bottom. I paused. From above, I could hear the faint but steady clink of glasses. The room was bustling once more, and the crew member was still waiting and grinning. After swallowing, I entered the hatch. The hallway was routine, unremarkable, and even comforting. However, the murmurs persisted, as gentle as breath against my ear. I didn't turn around. The air was dense and humid, with a subtle metallic smell of seawater, yet it appeared to be a typical hallway until I came out of the hatch. The walls had long, quivering shadows from my flashlight's feeble glow. There was the calm, methodical hum of the ship, without any music or laughter, except for the faint clinking of glasses above me. My legs felt leaden, as if the floor itself were resisting my attempts to move swiftly. The hallway seemed to go on forever into the night, longer than memory permitted. Water dropped from the roof in tiny droplets, each hissing softly as it struck the metal floor. My heart pounded. In the distance, something moved, barely perceptible. A tall, slender figure that was in and out of focus. I recalled the silver mist, the crate, and the faces of the luminous-eyed, captive individuals. They remained. I sensed them, eerily encircling me, whispering, taunting. Softly, my own name echoed, Alex, Alex. Suddenly, a strong wood door that looked like it belonged to a different age of the ship appeared. Through its crevices came the same quiet laughter I had heard previously. I opened it. The ballroom. Not the one shown in brochures, not the one I had known. This was distorted, not feasible. Rather than gleaming flooring, chandeliers swayed above a sea of dark water. Glasses tipped and spilled their silver liquid continuously. Tables floated. Figures, crew and passengers, danced in a slow, strange rhythm, all smiling, wet and pale. They looked into my eyes. And there he was, Mark. Or what had once been him. A glass was raised at the center. His voice stretched infinitely, echoing in my mind as he muttered, "Welcome back." It dawned on me then that the ship did more than simply trap individuals. It gathered them, bent them into its own mirror, and changed their shape. People who visited prohibited decks, drank alcohol, or stayed too long all joined in. Only the shell the ship needed remained when their humanity seeped away. The silver fog moved in my direction. The doors to the ballroom were gone as I turned to run. I had just climbed a stairwell that led to nowhere. My cries were echoing incessantly as each corridor turned into a different version of the same flooded hallway. Soft as silk, frightful as the dead, I heard words blending together. "Join us. You are ours now." I staggered and fell into the dark sea. It wasn't completely deep. Cold and alive, it clung to me. Figures, hands extended toward me in an inviting manner rather than a threatening one, as though I had been anticipated. My flashlight whirled in the water, displaying warped pictures of well-known people that were drowned but smiling. I let out a scream, but the ship's buzz drowned out my voice. I scratched and kicked, but I couldn't get away. The ballroom, the hallways, and the doors all blended into one unending nightmare. Then a solitary gateway glowed at the extreme edge of my field of vision. Beyond it, moonlight, or what appeared to be moonlight, crept in subtly, offering a way out. However, Mark said in a quiet but firm voice, "There is no leaving." As I sprang for it, I froze, only belonging. The water level climbed. The beam from my flashlight flickered. Whispers became louder, shadows grew closer, and my final clear idea came to me. The ship wasn't merely a ship, it had life. And I had already been involved. The darkness crept in, and I swallowed hard. Story 5. The first night I saw the lighthouse, I can still clearly recall it. On top of a deck that wasn't shown on any map, a single beam cut through the dense fog. Decal had never been mentioned in the announcement, but there it was, flashing dimly in the dark like a heartbeat. I'm Elliot Marston, a 32-year-old Seattle-based freelance photographer. I took this vacation in order to get away from it all and see the ocean in all of its moods. I'm obstinate, adventurous, and a little nervous in confined confines, but nothing could have prepared me for this. When the fog thickened, unusually late at night, I walked the upper decks with my camera slung over my shoulder. The lighthouse suddenly materialized out of nowhere, its slowly revolving light practically calling out to me. There was a strange tug in my chest, as if it wanted me to come. It was too quiet on the decks. Everything was gone, even the distant laughter, the normal hum of the engines, and even the conversation of other night owls. As I got closer, the fog almost seemed to be alive, curling around my ankles. I turned to see that no one was there, but I believed I heard whispers riding the wind. A tall man in a dark outfit passed me in the corridor, but he disappeared when I blinked. He appeared to go unnoticed. I arrived at this phantom deck stairs. The key card reader flashed up when I touched the door, even though it wasn't on the directory or the plan. I was invited in by a gentle chime. I swiped with a trembling hand and a pounding heart. The lighthouse room was round and small, with damp metal along the walls. Like smoke and corroded iron, the strong scent of sea salt had a subtle, acrid flavor. Distorted shadows were made on the walls by the light spinning from a bronze lantern that appeared to be centuries old. Water fell continuously from the ceiling, resonating like a sluggish drumming, but I couldn't make out what the fading plaque on the far wall said. Deck L, for those who arrived before the storm. I put down my camera with the intention of taking a picture, but as soon as I glanced through the lens, the room appeared to change. Shadows twisted and stretched. Passengers in vintage clothing were silhouetted in the lantern's light, their pale features with big, meaningless smiles caught in mid-motion. The room was still empty, but there was a faint sound of distant laughter and soft music. A shiver went through my body. My flashlight wavered. A man in a captain's coat with dark, strangely reflected eyes was leaning against the wall in the corner. Even though he remained motionless and silent, I could sense him observing me. Curiosity held me there, even though I wanted to get away. The door banged behind me as I reached for it, until the shadows on the walls stretched into shapes I couldn't identify. The lighthouse light continued to spin faster and faster. The ship's horn blasted somewhere above, distorted and out of sync, resonating unfathomably far away, like if it were intended just for me. That's when I understood. This deck wasn't meant to be there. And none of the people who had previously set foot on it had ever come back. That night, if you can call it sleep, I hardly slept at all. The spinning lighthouse would always appear between my eyelids when I closed my eyes, illuminating a fog that I couldn't get rid of with its pale beam. Like a talisman, I kept my camera by my side in the hopes that it would record something solid and real to show that I wasn't insane. When morning finally arrived, the sunlight was dim, practically off. Deck L was gone. All I had to do was return to the vacant corridor, which was lined with cabins I knew well. However, my garments still had the lingering cold and the smell of iron and salt. Over breakfast, I met a Chicago passenger named Clara Jensen. She was in her mid-30s, happy, but just as curious as I was. She reported hearing faint music reverberating in the hallways late at night and seeing strange lights close to the upper decks. She confessed, her eyes darting anxiously to the ceiling. I thought I was imagining it. We decided to look into it jointly and decided to wait until dusk since it felt alive somehow. Though I periodically caught glimpses of a tall man in a dark uniform, always vanishing when I stared directly, the crew appeared unaware of any odd activities. The fog had returned by 11:30 p.m., heavier and nearly luminous under the deck lights. Clara and I sneaked past the dozing hallways and made our way to the spot where I had first noticed the lighthouse. With each step, the moist, metallic smell of the air grew stronger. Then we caught sight of it. As though it had never been gone, Deck L was back. The keycard reader was glowing, almost throbbing, appealing. Even though the deck above was deserted, I vowed I could hear the faint echo of footfall. The circular room inside felt cramped, tight, and oppressive. With every flicker of the lantern, shadows stretched strangely around the walls. No instrument or source was visible, but the music had increased in volume and was now playing a distorted waltz as though it were in the room with us. "Have you heard that?" Clara muttered. Out of the corner came a hollow, gentle, and unmistakably human laugh. The shadows swirled in patterns that suggested someone was moving just out of sight, but nothing was visible when I swung my flashlight. We cautiously investigated, crossing hitherto undiscovered puddles. Then a hand appeared from the floorboards by the lantern, pallid and dripping wet. I staggered back, dropping my camera to the ground as Clara shrieked. The camera caught a moment of movement as a figure rose, garments drenched and in ruins, eyes as dark as ink, and stared at us. I shivered and whispered, "Deck L, it's alive." We turned to face the door after hearing a creak behind us. It was shutting slowly and deliberately on its own. When we rushed to force it open, we discovered that the corridor had changed. Hallways were impossible to navigate, and the numbers on the cabin doors were repeating in unreal patterns. Every step sounded as though we were plunging into the ocean. I recalled the quiet, unattainable voice from the lighthouse saying, "You're here. You have been selected." I looked at Clara, whose wide eyes mirrored my own fear. For a moment, I saw dozens of faces looking at us from the walls as the lamp flashed fiercely. These were passengers from past voyages, stuck forever, smiling as if nothing were wrong. The entire circular room was illuminated as the lighthouse beam rotated faster. With every turn, I saw figures approaching, reaching out, and then disappearing into the darkness as soon as I blinked. My breath was shallow, and my heart was racing. No one was on deck, but a trumpet blasted somewhere deep within the ship, a distorted echo that seemed almost mocking. As like there was something moving and waiting beneath us, the water-like puddles beneath our feet rippled. I firmly grasped Clara's arm. "We must leave immediately." The lantern's spinning light appeared to follow us as we scurried for the door, creating long, impossibly long shadows that lunged at our heels. The slick metal scraped my hands as I faltered and fell hard. Soft footsteps circled around us, encroaching, but there was nobody in sight. Next to my ear, we heard the dry, icy whisper, "You can't leave, not yet." We remained silent as we made our way down the impossibly long hallways. Every corridor appeared to go on forever, with doors repeating themselves in patterns and numbers, as if the spacecraft were making fun of our own existence. I felt Clara shiver as I continued to hold her hand on her shoulder, like if it had a spirit of its own. The fog from the upper decks had infiltrated and was curling around the floor. The beam of the lantern continued to rotate above, revealing fleeting glimpses of passengers who ought to have long since vanished. Eyes that are hollow but staring straight at us, faces as pale as driftwood. With a subtle urging that made my stomach turn, one stranger held up a hand. I staggered back, almost tripping into a puddle of something darker and thicker than water. "Don't stop," Clara muttered. Her voice trembled, but it also carried resolve. She underestimated her courage. I looked about, but there was no way out. Stairs led nowhere, the corridors twisted, and the walls themselves appeared to pulse, growing and shrinking as if the ship had a heartbeat. I swear that I could hear gentle murmurs coming from behind every door, people urging me to join them and remain. Then we discovered it, a cabin bearing the number 0. The door was slightly open and dimly lit. The air inside was hotter, quite oppressive. In the middle was a music box that played a melancholy lullaby while spinning on its own. The tune encircled us like shackles. Clara let out a gasp. I saw papers strewn all over the floor and thought, "That music, it's following us." Decades-old passenger lists, crew logs, and manifests, all with names I knew from the dimness of the corridors. My heartbeat quickened. Every name vanished as soon as I attempted to read it in its entirety. From the ceiling above came a loud splash, followed by another. Water poured down as though the ship itself were crying, not because of leaks. Faces formed from shifting puddles on the floor, with lips opening to utter our names and eyes blinking. I took hold of Clara and shoved her in the direction of the stairs from which we had come, but it was gone, replaced by a moist, slick, solid steel wall. I felt panic gnawing at me. The murmurs increased in volume, swirling and reverberating in every direction. Then I felt a damp, icy hand on my shoulder. The captain from Deck L was there as I turned around, flashlight trembling, his eyes black, reflecting, and unnaturally deep. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. In my thoughts, I heard, "You belong here now." But I stumbled backward and fell hard after stumbling over one of the puddle faces. I took a picture when my camera struck the ground. Dozens of figures, either drowned or rotting, but moving in spooky synchrony, rose up behind him as the flash illuminated them. They made a subtle but determined grab at us. We hurried along a winding hallway that hadn't existed just a moment before Clara shrieked and pulled me up. We were blinded by the lantern's quicker spin above. Trying to drag us back, shadows of hands blended with the fog and stretched hopelessly along the walls. I reached for my camera and started clicking frantically. A person wearing a captain's uniform had a melted face that was dripping like candle wax, but the flash captured it close enough for me to see it clearly. I felt like throwing up. The whispers abruptly ceased. Suffocating silence descended. There was a door ahead as the fog swirled. I had no other option, although I wasn't sure if it led out. I ran toward it with Clara. The walls moved once again as we grabbed for the handle. We glimpsed the night sky for the first time as I yanked the door open and heard a chuckle that was neither human nor mechanical but was crystal clear and reverberated inside my skull. No one leaves Deck L. Above the railing, the familiar water stretched infinity while stars twinkled. I felt a wave of relief, but then I saw the fog circling the upper decks. And the lighthouse beam rotated, surveying the ship, gleaming dimly over the ocean. There was an impending event. It was searching for us. Condensation made the handrail slippery under my fingertips, but I continued. Our sneakers splashed in puddles that seemed to form and disappear with every step as we ran along the deck, Clara's hand firmly holding mine. The metal groaned as though it held centuries worth of sorrow, and the spacecraft squealed in protest. The lighthouse beam whirled over us, looking in all directions. With surgical precision, its light sliced through the fog, brighter than it should have been. It seemed like it was probing my heartbeat right there in my chest. Clara shivered and muttered, "Do you believe that anyone else has made it out alive?" Despite my fear of the truth, I shook my head. Shadowy creatures hovered at the edge of the fog, half seen, watching every time I turned to look back. They remained motionless, but it was impossible to tell if they were alive or dead because of the way the fog whirled about them. We ducked into the main passage, the passenger decks, familiar pathways, or at least what I believed to be them. The wet carpet curled at the edges and felt uncomfortable underfoot. A gentle tune drifted from behind cabin 19, and door numbers were mismatched and repeated. I went cold. The music came from within the walls, not from the speakers. The high-pitched, distorted sound of a child's laughter reverberated from the vent above. I felt sick to my stomach. Clara took hold of my arm. "Keep going!" We reached the magnificent staircase. The stairs appeared longer than they should have been, and the railing was slippery and icy. The ship's buzz was nearly non-existent here, but I could hear water trickling. No, something heavier, like steady, rhythmical footfall. The elevator door then materialized, opening by itself and shining faintly. I was aware that we shouldn't, but instinct took precedence. I dragged Clara along, and we entered. The panel's numbers were illogical. My stomach dropped on decks 13, 7, and Deck L. We were wanting to get out of the lighthouse deck, so I hit the button for Deck L. The elevator lurched and hummed before coming to a stop. The doors led into a small hallway rather than a deck. The walls are made of damp stone and resemble an old cathedral. Behind us, I could hear the voices of every journey, the melted faces, the drowned. They were hurting us, not pursuing us, in the direction of something. At the end of the hallway, a dim illumination emerged. My beam bounced off of condensation-slick walls as I ran. I could not understand the words, but I sensed them. "Stay!" The brightness showed an archway. Clara gasped when a hand touched her shoulder and said, "Belong." Nobody there, so I whirled. The only things that fold in on themselves are shadows. From the walls came a quiet, moist cough, and I heard a creak. The corridor came to a sudden stop. A gateway was produced by the radiance. The sea below was serene, but too dark and too still, and the lighthouse deck stretched unnaturally high beyond it. A man with black eyes, a ragged but clean uniform, and a lamp that didn't produce shadows stood in the middle of the deck. It was the captain from earlier. His quiet voice reverberated throughout my mind as he said, "You've come a long way, but who stays is determined by the light." Abruptly, fog whirled wildly, and dozens of figures rose up from the deck and the sea. With drenched hands and impossible smiles, they reached for us. Clara screamed as she nearly fell after her foot slipped when I pulled her back. I caught her in the act. I attempted to run, but the deck stretched indefinitely in front of me. The lantern was raised by the captain. I was struck squarely in the chest by the beam. My entire body went cold. I could feel my thoughts tugging in their direction, toward the fog, toward the sea below. Then I thought about the camera I had in my bag. I took it out and took picture after picture. The figures hesitated and flickered like holograms with each flash. This was their weakness, I understood. Light. The truth. Evidence that we were still outside of their domain. In a scarcely heard whisper, Clara asked, "Do you think we can make it?" I didn't respond. I continued to snap. The figures sprang closer as the captain's smile grew. My name was whispered by the cold, damp fog that pressed in. A chilly, damp hand touched my shoulder. I whirled. Empty. The hold persisted. It was neither physical or human, yet I could feel it bending me in the direction of the railing. A final spin of the lighthouse beam revealed something I had not previously noticed. Mirrors encircled the deck, reflecting the fog, the water, and the drowned. Countless reflections. No more place to flee to. Then I noticed that the light from the lantern was spreading. The shadows were flinching, and the whispering were dying down. But the lighthouse beam was no longer scanning the ship. We were being scanned by it. Clara yelling my name was the last thing I remembered before I was dragged into the fog. The captain spoke softly. "You can never leave the light. Not now." And a chilly, damp hand wrapped around me. The fog was no longer just outside of us. It was inside of us. Every breath smelt like decay and brine. For a brief moment, I sensed Clara's fingers slipping from mine, as though she were already being drawn into the fog. Between me, the captain's lantern threw light that warped the limits of reality as it floated impossibly. His eyes were endless black holes, but his smile remained the same. As though my thoughts had transformed into his voice, he said, "The light chooses." In an attempt to employ the mirrors as a shield, I staggered in their direction. The figures behind us, the drowned, the twisted, the joyful features of travelers who had disappeared days earlier, were magnified by each reflection. They were waiting rather than fleeing. They anticipated my fatigue. I took hold of Clara's arm. "The elevator is necessary," I hissed, but there was no back corridor. The lighthouse deck stretched endlessly, every board saturated, every railing twisted, just fog and mirrors. After that, one of the reflections moved on its own. Neither Clara nor I are being mirrored. A little girl with black eyes, pale skin, and hair stuck to her face. Her mouth opened wide as she gestured toward the lantern, but no sound came. A scream without sound. "We shouldn't be here," Clara muttered in terror. I turned to flee, but the mirrors shook like water. My image stumbled, contorted, and grinned. A second hand clamped around my wrist, moist and icy. Not Clara's, not human. I went into panic. The figure disappeared like smoke when I waved the beam at it, but the fog grew closer more quickly. That's when I noticed the lighthouse wasn't a deck. It was a trap, a point of collection. Not only did the captain's lantern light up, it marked. Clara dragged me to the brink, each burst of light drawing us nearer to them, closer to being chosen. Far below, I could see the lake, calm yet black and boundless. It would take us in an instant if we made one mistake or slipped. With trembling hands, I grasped the lamp. It was nearly alive and heavier than it appeared. The shadows were momentarily burned as the light pierced the fog. The figures flinched. I came to see that the pictures I had shot earlier were wards, not just proof. Each flash pierced the fog as I took a few photos. Clara's shriek reverberated, far away but very next to me. An entire mass of faces, grasping, twisting, attempting to become one, surged out of the mirrors as a shadow. I sensed a tug toward the direction of the railing and the boundless black water. I stepped into the edge. I faltered. Clara let out a scream. In the hopes that the light might give us a moment, I flung the lantern. It burst into radiance, casting shadows into the mist. We crashed through the mirrors and slid backward into them. Our hands and arms were injured by the glass, yet we continued to move. We saw glimmers of the actual ship when the reflection cracked and splintered, but it always dragged us back into the lighthouse world. It was my final encounter with the skipper. He held up a hand as a caution, not to stop us. "The deck never forgets," he whispered. Then the world shook. The light never forgives. The deck, the mirrors, and the fog all became hazy. We were plummeting into an impossibility. Above us, the lighthouse lantern whirled brighter and faster until it was reduced to a white-hot point and our reflections blended with those of the drowned. The cruise deck was deserted when I opened my eyes. Quiet. No fog. Not a lighthouse. Only the quiet, everyday hum of engines and the distant chatter of people in the air above. Clara, shivering and pallid, held onto my arm. We sprinted over to the closest cabin. The phones were dead when I tried to call security and let them know. And the lighthouse deck was gone when I peered out. There was no Deck L anywhere on the map. I kept the camera by my side that night. All of my pictures of the lantern, the drowning people, and the never-ending fog were blank. Each and every one. Clara said, "Did it really happen?" I don't respond. I am aware. The lighthouse deck is waiting somewhere, just outside the curtain of everyday life. Captain waits. The light is waiting. Furthermore, we remain linked. When I close my eyes, I sense it. A chilly touch brushed my shoulder, a whisper across the deck. Some decks never exist, but they never forget you either, I remember, every time the fog enters my thoughts.